Well, the first thing I woke up to at 7 o'clock this morning was all the news about Daniel Kretinsky and the move that he's made with regards to the latest saga in the whole West Ham United ownership and share situation. And he's moved pretty swiftly. I mean, given that it was only a couple of days ago that we heard that Amanda Staveley had made an offer to Vanessa Gold for her 25.1% shares. Daniel Kretinsky has said he will evaluate his situation with a preemption process, and he's made his move. And if we've read the situation correctly over the past few days, this could be yet another significant development in West Ham United's ownership battle since he actually joined the club back in 2021. With less than a month remaining before the transfer window shuts, the last thing anyone connected with West Ham really needs is more uncertainty over who's going to ultimately control the direction of this football club. So let's start with what we know. I've already said, over the past few days, we've been discussing the implication of Vanessa Gold agreeing to sell her family's 25.1% stake to Amanda Staveley. This is after being led to believe that it was Kretinsky who'd be buying 16% of those shares. We now understand Kretinsky didn't want to buy the whole 25.1% because if he did, his overall stake in West Ham would have increased to beyond a critical 51% threshold. As has now become public, an agreement dating back to when Kretinsky agreed to sign up with West Ham in 2021, an agreement was made then if Kretinsky's shareholding reached 51% or more, he would become contractually obliged to buy out David Sullivan and the existing shareholders at a valuation significantly above what many believed the club was worth. In other words, crossing that line simply would hand him control, but it would potentially commit him to spending hundreds of millions of pounds more than he would have currently wished to do. So rather than simply waiting for the preemption process surrounding the gold shares to play out, Daniel Kretinsky has chosen to act first. He has agreed to sell just over 2% of his existing shareholding to Czech businessman Jacob Havland. Now, on the face of it, that almost sounds counterproductive. Why would someone who is trying to increase his influence voluntarily reduce his own stake? Kind of seems illogical, right? Until you look one step further ahead. Because by reducing his existing holding before acquiring the Gold family shares in full, Kretinsky creates room to increase his overall ownership again without immediately crossing that 51% threshold. It's a move that appears designed to solve the biggest obstacle standing between him and greater control of West Ham United. It's the sort of move you kind of often see in a chess game. I don't want to see checkmate, but that's what it is. Now, before we go any further, I asked whether Daniel Kretinsky's proposed sale to Jacob Havland would itself be subject to the same preemption procedure that has dominated discussion surrounding Vanessa Gold's proposed sale to Amanda Staveley. And I've been told that it should be. And if that's correct, we're now looking at something quite unique at West Ham United. Not one preemption process that's already underway because of Gold's proposed sale to Staveley. Now, this latest transaction appears to have triggered another. Now, many people are suggesting, oh, well, it's a small amount of money and it doesn't count. It's beneath a particular threshold. I've been told quite categorically it triggers a second preemption process. Suddenly, there are two separate transactions unfolding simultaneously, each with the potential to influence the other. Now, some people might say Daniel Kretinsky seems to be taking a huge gamble, lowering his current threshold, lowering his current stake in the club. But I'm not so convinced that he is taking a gamble. I think quite the opposite is probably true. You put yourself in his shoes for one moment. If you're about to restructure your own sharehold in order to create a pathway towards acquiring a larger stake in this football club, would you really do that without having a pretty good idea how the other shareholders intend to respond? Personally, I don't think so. If I were Daniel Kretinsky, before agreeing any deal with Jacob Hartland, I would want to know whether David Sullivan, Trip Smith, or any of the other shareholders had any intention whatsoever of exercising their preemption rights to the Staveley bid. I'd want to know whether anyone was planning to stand in my way. And I'd want to know whether anyone intends to compete for the gold shares or whether they'd want to compete for the 2% that Kretinsky was offering to Halfland. And I would suggest that certainly he's had the conversations and the other shareholders have gone, I've got no intention of going into any of this process. It's all yours. Because that's certainly what I'd want to know, whether I'd want to know whether this strategy has a realistic chance of succeeding before setting anything in motion. That's why I struggle to believe this is simply a speculative gamble from Kretinsky. It feels more like a much calculated move. Now, I don't believe someone with Kretinsky's experience in business makes business and makes decisions of this magnitude on instinct alone. So if Kretinsky has now positioned himself to acquire the Gold family shares without triggering the contractual consequences of crossing 51% threshold, what does that mean for Amanda Staveley? Up until now, Amanda Staveley appears to have had the momentum. Her reported interest in acquiring Vanessa Gold shares kind of changed the whole conversation about West Ham United. For the first time, it looked as though there was a realistic opportunity for a new investor to establish a meaningful foothold within West Ham. Now, there's many fans out there. Isn't it funny how West Ham United fans always seem to end up being split on anything that happens? Because now there's a number of West Ham fans who have gone, Staveley would have been or should be the best thing that happens to West Ham United. And other fans are saying, well, the better the devil you know, I'd rather stick with Daniel Kretinsky. So it's quite interesting how yet again, David Moyes is split over that, and decisions made, and players that we bought and players that we've sold, and we always seem to be split down the middle. Some fans want it, some. I guess that's healthy. That's healthy, and this is the latest split in the fan base. A lot of people wanted Amanda Staveley to come on board. A lot of people suggested it probably wasn't a good thing, and only pointing to what's happening at Newcastle right now since Staveley moved on. Look. Whether the foothold eventually leads to control of this football club or not, what Staveley did was undeniably put pressure on Daniel Kretinsky. He had a decision to make. He thought a decision had already been agreed between him and Vanessa Gold with the 16% shares. We don't know what's happened. Maybe Kretinsky turned around to Vanessa Gold at some stage and went, look, I promised you this much money, but I think it's worth less. And maybe that's what's triggered Vanessa Gold to look elsewhere, knowing that Amanda Staveley was interested. We don't know what's happened there. But he's certainly now, Kretinsky has been pushed into a corner, I guess, and he's had to make a decision. Now, does he allow someone else to enter the share register or exercise, as in Amanda Staveley, or does he exercise his preemption rights and match the offer that she's made? In reaction to Amanda Staveley's interest, Daniel Kretinsky appears to have changed the playing field yet again. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean Amanda Staveley's out of the picture. Far from it. She could still go for David Sullivan shares. But with Kretinsky about to increase his stakehold to around 50%, just under the threshold, plus his business associate, Harvland, on the board as well, with an additional 2%, 2.5%, something like that, the momentum is purely with Daniel Kretinsky. And even if Staveley bought out Sullivan, any plans she could make or she would want to make would easily be outvoted by Kretinsky and Harvland. A superbly strategic and clever move. But whilst all these shenanigans are playing out in the boardroom, there's this important matter, of course, that needs to happen with the playing staff of this football club. Recruitment doesn't stop just because ownership questions remain unresolved. Nuno needs players. The transfer window shuts in 4 weeks' time, and it's not going to wait for the ownership structure to sort itself out. That's why I think Kretinsky's timing tells us something. Could he have waited? throughout the whole process, the preemption process before making his move? Sure. Could he have waited after the transfer window? Quite possibly, yes. But he hasn't. He's acted almost immediately after Vanessa Gold's statement. And that suggests that even he finally realizes there is a sense of urgency around this football club. An urgency usually tells us that someone believes time is not on your side. I imagine with what Kretinsky has done, we will finally see some transfer movement this week and not before time. It will surprise me if we don't sign at least one and maybe two players before this week is out. Now, let's turn to David Sullivan briefly, because throughout all of this, there is him who's influential, but he's not said anything about anything. Now, I know the whole thing about this whole stadium thing, that he apparently wants to go to the first game and he's been advised not to. But with regards to what's going on off the pitch, look, it's very easy to focus on Kretinsky and Staveley because their names are dominating the headlines. But Sullivan still remains an important figure in this entire process. His influence comes from the choices available to him behind the scenes. For example, Sullivan could decide to exercise his preemption rights over the shares being offered from Vanessa Gold, or the 2% offered or the 2.5% offered to Jacob Halfland by Daniel Kretinsky. Equally, he can choose not to do anything at all. He could simply allow the transaction to proceed, or the transactions to proceed. Only David Sullivan knows which course he believes is best to protect both his own interests and the future of West Ham. I think his own interests are far more important to him than West Ham, I would imagine. And I'm certainly not going to pretend that I know what he's thinking. But what I will say is this: if you're David Sullivan, you're not simply deciding whether to support Kretinsky or Amanda Staveley. You're deciding who you believe offers you the best long-term future for your sharehold, and protecting that particular sharehold. Does he trust Kretinsky more than Staveley? That answer will be evident when the preemption process kicks off, which it has for the gold shares. If Sullivan does nothing, it means that he's putting all his eggs in the Kretinsky basket. I think he will allow Kretinsky to crack on, take a bigger slice of the West Ham pie. And there is another factor to all this. Why, after 5 years, has Kretinsky now made his move and made it so affirmatively? Why has he not actioned anything in the past? Well, I guess it's not just about taking control of this football club, is it? We would be fools to think that this is only about West Ham United. There's the little matter of the stadium, and there's also the matter of the land it sits on. Daniel Kretinsky and Amanda Staveley, for that matter, both know the true worth of the stadium and the land. Once Kretinsky has full and proper control of this football club, the next step is clearly the squad, of course, and then it's all eyes on the stadium and the land that it sits on. As we know, stadium losses, 19 million a year. I'm sure Sadiq Khan wants a solution. Kretinsky can offer to potentially buy the stadium or agreeing a much longer lease term, a new lease term. But what incentive is there, if there's a new lease term, what incentive is there to take a stadium on that loses money every year? I guess with the agreement of any stadium over the stadium is going to come an agreement of the land it sits on and the right to take on some of that land, to be able to develop it and regenerate it. That's what Staveley talked about in her interview with Bloomberg that we saw just the other day. I think it was filmed some time ago, but we only saw a sight of it just the other day. It's never about West Ham United, is it? We'd love to think it is, but it isn't, is it really? It's only about, or it's always been about, the stadium and even more, the actual land that it sits on. That's why Kretinsky is making his move. This gives him the leverage that he hadn't had before. Take control, and again, then go ahead and sort out a deal with the Greater London Authority, ratified by Sadiq Khan, and then get to work on developing the stadium and then building on the land that surrounds it. All of a sudden, you have a regeneration project that can bring in hundreds of millions of pounds each year. Kretinsky, let's not be fooled that this was ever about West Ham, because we are, I'm sorry to say it, in the grand scheme of things, a small fish in a much bigger pond. Would Kretinsky redevelop the stadium? I doubt it, but I think he'll find a way to make it more palatable for West Ham fans, for football fans, because I think we'd still have to hold athletics there, but it can be changed. Just improvements, slight improvements that we talked about, standing areas, the wall coming down, which it has for this coming season, allocation of family zones and stuff like that, and maybe finding a clever way of bringing the seats a bit closer to the pitch. Maybe it all can be done, and probably that's what will happen if Kretinsky has control. He's made his move. It looks like at this moment in time, Staveley's out of the picture, and all this hopefully is being timed to them. What really matters to us right now is we probably at the end of the day don't give a damn who owns this club. Well, we do give a damn, but what we want is to start focusing on this squad, and then the future. Well, I guess that's another story altogether.